August 8th, 2016, are calling the Los Angeles City Health Commission to order. Clerk will call the roll, please.
Andres Taylor,
Here.
Avila, Griffith,
Here.
Hisrich,
Here.
Hawkes, Shannon,
Here.
Sharp, Vic.
Here.
8 members present and a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to an approval of the minutes from July 11th, 2016. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Motion. I'll make a motion to approve.
It's been moved and seconded for the approval of the minutes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Next, we'll move on to neighborhood council comments. I don't believe that staff has received, any notification from neighborhood councils to give comments, so we will move the agenda to item number 1, which is a presentation on health-related issues by Angelo Bilomo, who is the Director of Environmental Health for the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, speaking on health and other impacts related to oil and gas drilling in residential areas. Thank you so much for coming.
Where would you like me to, I can stand if you'd like.
There's a mic in the middle.
Either way.
What do you want to click on?
No.
Oh, they're going to be slides?
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Angelo Bilomo, and I am Deputy Director for Health Protection for the County Public Health Department. I did try to make this presentation about a month and a half ago, and we postponed it to tonight. In checking with you about the available time, I thought I was asked to limit my remarks to 10 minutes, so I'm going to go through knowing and anticipating based on what we were told that there may be a number of questions. So I'll just go through, make a few remarks, and then be happy to answer questions in any area related to the health department, but probably with a focus on these types of facilities. So when we look at oil and gas type facilities, oil and gas production facilities in particular, the extent to which we need a body of regulations or lack of regulations, and maybe sometimes beyond regulations, the standards of care that one would have to apply really depend on one significant factor, and that is where the facility is located. For some facilities, the standard regulations that are employed may be adequate. For other facilities, they'll be grossly inadequate. And this has a lot to do with the types of scenarios we encounter in Los Angeles. And that is that we have oil production facilities that are located immediately adjacent, in some cases, to neighborhoods. And that, of course, leaves no buffer, no zone for mistakes or errors. And even if we had 100% compliance with the existing regulations, this is, in my opinion, this is an area that has been under-regulated for many years, many decades. And so we have to make sure that there is, in fact, strict compliance with the regulations that are on the books. And then we have to ask ourselves whether that goes far enough, because in many instances it won't go far enough. I think that what I recall over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years is sort of a renewed interest on oil and gas production facilities within Los Angeles. And I think some of this had to do with a controversial high school that was under construction. I believe it was in the mid-1990s. It was called Belmont. And the school site was not thoroughly studied before they began construction. And then they noticed that they were picking up methane at certain portions of the school site, and it was above the levels of significance, and really raised a lot of concern about the continued construction of this high school, which was about 30% complete. We studied that. I was part of the school district in that era. Actually, I was called in by the school district as a consultant. But we studied that, and we found that had they done due diligence, the type of normal due diligence that is done before you develop properties, they would have encountered all of the issues, and they could have dealt with them systematically. They could have taken every one of the old wells and made sure that it was abandoned to appropriate standards before they began to construct the school site. But because they hadn't done that due diligence, they basically had to stop the project, and they actually had to remove what was the completed administration building. It was done quietly over a few weekends, but nevertheless they had to remove the administration building and then put in the proper active gas ventilation system and then continue construction of the school. None of these things are beyond the ability of science to deal with. The question really becomes, do we want to put that many bells and whistles into a facility? Can we safely put a school in the middle of that field? We could, but it takes almost too much in the way of redundancy, and the costs are just outrageous. So when you look at the investments that were made at that school, it was probably not a good investment. And had they had the information when they were looking at the site, they might have passed on that site. We certainly would have recommended it. So then following Belmont, there were a number of other cases. I want to go a little more recently here. A few years ago, there was the Allenco facility, not too far from this site right here, and a couple of others that were beginning to be focused on because the community was aware of these oil production facilities, had likely been complaining about them for many years. But I think that the typical response from the regulatory agencies were they're either in compliance or near in compliance with the applicable regulations. Colleagues of mine from the Department of Public Health studied it long enough and interviewed enough of the residents to realize that regardless of whether they were meeting the standards that were applicable, and we still don't know whether they were, this facility was having impacts on the surrounding community, which was located right across the street. When we looked a little bit further, we realized that the production within that facility had increased by 400% in just the year that we had looked at it. And that was because the price of oil, I think, had increased to the point where production was significantly scaled up, and what might have been some residual problems historically became unbearable for members of in that community. The Department of Public Health had responded by putting together what we called a environmental health assessment, which said we understand it may be in compliance with the applicable standards from the air district, but it is having an impact on the health and welfare of people living in the neighborhood. So it got us to be thinking about what types of additional standards may be appropriate when you have this industrial residential interface that is too close. And that's really what we're talking about. Most of the regulations never envision that you would have a regulated facility share a property boundary with the backyard of a residential lot. So when that does occur, we really have to be extremely careful, and we have to make sure that the laws are followed. And as I mentioned, even in that case, there's really no room for error. So it's not an advisable course of action, but we do have this existing landscape throughout LA, and we can't solve it overnight. So we really have to be thoughtful, which is really good. Some of the things I'm hearing that this commission has thought about. We have to be thoughtful about what changes do we want to put in, and how do we change the pattern of decision making that created some of these problems. So there's two tracks we have to run. How do we evaluate the current conflicts that exist, and abate the conflicts so that they are not endangering or impacting public health and welfare. And then on a second track, we have to ask ourselves, how do we improve the decision-making for these facilities on a going forward basis so that we don't create or add to the current landscape of these types of problems? I think the next point I want to make 3 points here. The next point I want to make is that we really have to ask ourselves, do we want to respond to these types of incidents? Do we want these facilities to find us? Because that's generally how we find there's a problem with one of these facilities. It's usually not done during the routine inspection and regulation that these facilities are subject to. It's almost as if the poor way in which these facilities have been regulated has become commonplace. And so perhaps regulatory agencies or others are hesitant to change the practice. It's like you get into a regulatory review and you do it a certain way for a number of years and you're reluctant to say, maybe that's not enough, maybe we need to change that. So I think to this question of, do we simply respond or do we come up with a better way of regulating this problem and abating the impacts that it has on the public health? Clearly, we should be looking for better ways to do that. And that brings me to the third point, which is I think there's 2 other things we can do beyond simply responding when the problem finds us. We could do prevention and we could do surveillance. So let me just say a word about both of those. On the prevention front, if we ask what could we do, we could go out proactively and complete an inventory of where we have oil and gas facilities throughout our jurisdiction. The county is doing that now, and my sense is the city is joining or doing some of their own work. But it's a really good idea for us to know where do these facilities exist and then put them through a triage to see, are they problematic currently? And if so, what grouping should we place them in? Do we put them in a grouping that says we have significant impacts that are evident to the surrounding community? Do we put them in one saying we're not aware of any particular impacts, but we probably should look at it a little bit further? So it's that type of triage that I think would make sense if we're going to do prevention. We start with an inventory, and then we go out and we assess what are these facilities presenting right now in the way of public health risk or uncertainty. And then we can talk also in the area of prevention, developing better policies so that the decisions we make in the future are better than the ones we made in the past that contributed to some of these conditions that we're dealing with. And then the second element that we should be looking at is surveillance. And I really think of it in 2 ways. We should be doing surveillance in the environment to determine whether there are impacts or changes on environmental conditions. So the type of routine monitoring, air monitoring that might be done or could actually be enhanced in these facilities when they're in close proximity to people, that would help because it would almost represent ongoing sentinel of do we have exposures and are those at significant levels. Now, because monitoring, you might get the regulatory agency like AQMD to say, we're checking and we don't find any constituents that are at a level that is believed to cause a health impact. But we're still getting complaints from the public, and the public is still obviously impacted. So they may not be receiving a toxic exposure to the point where they're going to incur a long-term chronic condition, but it still could be something maybe a little larger than a nuisance odor, but less than causing a change in their, a permanent change in their health status. And that's where we have to focus, so that we have to look at this not just in terms of whether we've triggered a toxic threshold and we expect to see illness develop, but really, are we degrading the living environment for the people that are being impacted by this adjoining facility. We have to look at it differently. We have to sort of change the paradigm for what we consider acceptable. Not exceeding the regulatory standards, but nevertheless presenting impacts to public health should not be acceptable. And that's why we have to look at this differently. I'm going to just wrap up my comments so we can get into questions if there are some by saying that I think that the oil and gas industry has been one that many people who deal within the industry know that they have not had the extent of regulatory reforms that many other facilities did. And it had to do with the fact that when a lot of the reforms that were enacted at the federal level and at the state level, when those reforms were made, there were certain different treatments that were done to oil and gas. And there were probably lots of good reasons and maybe not so good reasons as to why the oil and gas production was treated differently. But it's time for us now to look at how do we catch up, because I don't think this is a matter of saying we can't have oil production within the city or county of Los Angeles. I think it's really a matter of deciding how do we do it in a way where it does not degrade on the health and well-being of our citizens. The answer to whether that could be done, I don't know the answer. I can just tell you that in a lot of the sites that I've been called out to, most recently one, it's the Furman Street wells. I don't know, Chairman Shannon, did you get a copy of I sent a 2-pager over here talking about an assessment we just did on the Furman Street wells? Okay. Yeah, I think we sent it to Willie, a gentleman by the name, I'm not sure what his name was, but we sent it to him today because I wanted you all to have it. But I do have a copy here, so I'll leave it with you. But it represents an assessment we did last week because we were called out due to activities within the city of LA to abandon some wells, and it was actually creating quite an exposure to the people in the surrounding community. This was an effort to try to deal with the problem, but it actually exacerbated the problem because it wasn't conducted properly. So I'm going to conclude my comments. I'm more than happy to talk about any one of the facilities that we've looked at, but rather than go on this, I'd just rather stop at this point and see if there are any questions.
Great, thank you so much, and we really appreciate you coming out. I have a few questions, if I can start, and then we'll move on to the other commissioners. I have a few questions about Aliso Canyon, and we haven't really had anyone come and present on that particular problem that happened. And I wanted to start with the well itself, which was, I believe, SS-25.
Yes.
So my understanding was that the number of casings in that well was 2. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know enough about the physical nature of it, but suffice it to say that like most of these production wells, there is a center bore hole that a well casing is placed in. And then there's an annular space, and that annular space, I think, was utilized for conveying. So you actually had 2 holes that were used for the movement of gases.
And is it true that the number of casings went up? So the newer wells usually have more casings as opposed to the one in SS-25.
Sounds right, but I couldn't answer that for sure. I'm not an expert in that area.
Has the county, because I know that you talked about an inventory, and that's something that I'm obviously very interested in, and know that we talked about, of the various oil wells. And I'm wondering if the county is looking at other wells that have a similar profile to the one that blew in Aliso Canyon.
We are. In fact, there's 2 things going on there. The Board of Supervisors did convene what they're calling an oil and gas strike team. And the purpose was to put together an inventory of oil and gas facilities within the county unincorporated area to begin with, and then to go through and check them, do an assessment to see what we find just based on that. This is an effort that is being chaired by the Department of Regional Planning, but it's got participation from Public Health, County Council, and a number of other organizations. I think it'll be a very interesting initial step assessment. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Oh, my question was just if you were looking at other wells that have
Oh.
a similar profile to
Yeah.
Aliso Canyon.
Right, so that strike team was one thing that the county did. And the second thing we're doing is that we are, the county has filed suit against SoCal Gas because we were concerned about what was going on at Aliso Canyon, but we were also concerned about other facilities that are operated by this operator. And we wanted to learn as a result of this case whether or not we had similar problems elsewhere. So obviously, we're concerned about other wells within Aliso Canyon, but we are concerned about other facilities that are operated or have been operated by Southern California Gas.
Can you tell us what departments and agencies were involved in the evacuation of the residents in that area? And also about park closures and school closures?
Well, when the Public Health Department continued to get complaints, and it looked like this massive, I hate to use the word leak. A member of the community told me one time, please don't use the word leak. It's not a leak, it's a blowout. But when this massive blowout took place, I think the expectation for members of the public and others was it was going to be wrapped up, it was going to be sealed within a few days. And when it looked like it was going to go on for more than a few days, and then more than a couple of weeks, and then months, it became clear that we needed to give relief to people who were being bombarded by these odors and were suffering the ill effects of them. So what the county health department had instructed SoCal Gas to provide temporary relocation for any residents that were being impacted until this massive release of gas could be capped, because we really didn't know what we were dealing with at that point. The agencies that were involved in that, there were a number: the fire department, public health, the Division of Oil and Gas, Geothermal Resources, Dogger, the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And I'm talking about agencies that were there to assist in the assessment as well as the relocation effort as well. There were a number of county departments that focus on consumer affairs that were involved in that as well. But we had a responsible party who for a while had, provided that relocation housing.
Okay, and then on the city end, obviously, there were council members' offices, Englander's office, Mitch Englander's office, I think, was involved as well. And I'm
Yes.
sure that supervisorial offices were as well. So it
They
took up
were,
staff
yes.
time as well in
Yep.
that. Okay. When you're looking at the inventory of the wells and a mapping of the wells and I know you're looking at the county and we're looking at the city, obviously. Are you going to Dogger for that information? Are there other agencies that you utilize in order to do the mapping?
Well, a lot of that information is available. Question is how complete it is and how easy it is to compile it. We actually have a consultant that's working under contract with the Department of Regional Planning that is providing these maps to us, and I think most of them are gained through the state agencies. But the information is fairly available, and I think it's very telling when you look at the maps that show where are all the old oil wells, the ones that are active, as well as the ones that were active but are no longer active.
And then can you speak to the closure of schools and parks in the area?
Right. We never implemented at County Public Health a mandatory evacuation because we believe that the major concern that members of the public had at the time was fire and explosion, and the fire department had assured us that because this was venting to the air, there wouldn't be a fire and explosion. But as time went by, first few weeks, it became clear that the impacts, if it was just from the mercaptan or if there was something else in the gas that was causing these symptoms, they needed to have relief. And we extended out that ultimately to the schools because the schools, some students, actually it was more faculty that were expressing symptoms as well. And we didn't, again, we didn't make a finding that we needed to close the schools, but because our advice to the school district is when you have people who are suffering from this exposure, if they're getting headaches, what happens is in a classroom or at the school, you'd have a number of people saying, I don't smell anything, I feel fine, and you would have some who are obviously distressed. And so our recommendation was the people that are being affected by this, even though the numbers that we're looking at, we can't tell them that these numbers in themselves would cause that. The best way to deal with that is for them to be removed from the immediate exposure until the well was capped. And we extended that. School district said, fine, we're going to make the voluntary decision to close our school because we can't just take a bunch of people out. We'd have to permanently close and relocate the school for the time it takes to get back to normal. And so they did go ahead and close the school down.
Okay,
There were
and it
two
was-
schools,
There were two schools, and then the students were relocated to another.
two other schools. They went to maybe 2 or 3 receiving schools until the schools were then reopened.
Okay, and I know at least one park was closed that I found because there was oily residue. I think it was first. I think what happened was somebody came out and did an assessment and said it was fine, and then
Yeah.
the kids were playing there, and someone from Mitch Englander's office, a staff member, had gone there and found oily residue, so they closed down the park again.
Right, yeah, that was a county had received a complaint. County public health staff had gone out to investigate the complaint, did not find any oily residue. Subsequently, a city official did go out and close the park. And that's all I can tell you. I can give you a report if you'd like it, but that's all I can tell you about that incident.
And then the residents who were evacuated went to hotels in the area, and sometimes places farther away from their work. And so, I mean, I'm guessing that we would find this fairly disruptive to their lives for several months. on end.
Unbelievably disruptive. That was clear from the people we had talked to. These are people that when you meet them at community meetings, it really reminds you what impact this has on people, because you could sort of see it in their eyes. They had had enough, and it was really remarkable. We have very well-trained public health staff, public health nurses, medical doctors, and they were all affected by the stories that they had heard from these residents. And every once in a while you would hear, well, we don't understand why people are being impacted, as if they were making it up. And then when your staff sits down with these individuals and actually goes through their histories, it's obvious they're being impacted by conditions in their environment.
And then in the cleanup of their homes, I know that there was a court order to have their homes cleaned. Is that correct?
There was.
And then it wasn't properly done, and so I think there was a second court order for, I guess, a different company to come in and do a more thorough cleaning, or maybe the same company to do a more thorough cleaning.
Well, the short version of that is that the judge did order cleaning before those people that were relocated would be forced to come back to their homes. He did not want to see them come into their homes until those homes were cleaned. Now, for the people that were already in their homes, the judge's order didn't deal with that, but the county directive did. The public health department issued a directive saying, you're going to clean all the homes that have been impacted. But what we're doing now with regard to the homes that weren't cleaned properly, because we think about a half of them were not cleaned adequately with the protocol. That, as well as the other homes in Porter Ranch that need to be cleaned and were not part of the judge's order. We're back in court on those two issues.
John,
I mean-
Commissioner Hisrich.
Thank you. John Hisrick. In talking about how these inspections are carried out, clearly the threat of fire, the odors, that's pretty obvious that those are concerns. But what about the quality of life issues around the sites? The noise, the working hours, the heavy equipment being brought in. Last time we were here, several people in the community talked about that as the kind of impacts that from a day-to-day quality of life is kind of more important, not that they aren't in, if you will, fear of a blowout, but the trucks and all that, what discretion do you or any other agency have to deal with those kinds of issues?
Well, we'll see. I really appreciate that question, and I'm going to send you a document that we prepared for, not this particular type of site, but another one, where we said, look, we can do a conventional risk assessment, which looks at chemical levels and whether those chemical levels will cause an exposure that could produce a health effect.
Right.
But we said that's not enough for some of these facilities. We got to look at these broader quality of life issues. And we did it quite well in one site, and I'll send you that document. But you're absolutely right. We've got to look at the broader impacts on people's health and welfare. And I would say that noise is one of them. Odor is a big one. Sometimes it's just the feeling that people, in your home, you can't escape some of these non-toxic exposures that are impacting you because it's your home. So it's the one place people go to try to escape all the stuff that they're encountering. And when you don't have that rest at home, it does have an impact on your quality of life and on your health.
And some of the wells are pretty industrial, I guess you could say, in their style or how they look. And then there are certainly some, and they tend to be more often in the more comfortable parts of town, I guess you could say, where they're really concealed. They try to make them look like a building. Is there any, how does that get dealt with? I mean, is that, what is it, just wealth, or is it?
I think you're pointing
influence?
to an inequity that has to be addressed. And I'll just give you the bottom line on that. We find that in areas like along the Pico corridor and the Beverly Hills area, when you do have these facilities that are paneled or
Right.
buffered in some way, we have less complaints. And I'll give you another visual, which is we know what they look like when we're driving down Pico. Well, some of what we've seen in the center of the city, and I'm talking about the Furman Street example of last week, we've got oil pumpers in the backyard.
Yeah.
They've got a small little fence around it, but the fence has no longer integrity, so kids have access to going in there, and kids have access to small drums or containers of oil. So, those are conditions that shouldn't be tolerated.
And in terms of sorting out jurisdictional questions about that, you mentioned, what's the oil and gas agency? I think it's a state agency?
It is, yeah.
And presumably they are dealing primarily with the issues involved with getting oil and gas out of the ground.
Absolutely. They're looking at what's going on below the surface.
And the fire department, at least tangentially, is concerned about explosions and so on.
They are.
So the Department of Public Health, presumably, which has a broader mandate, would be the agency to address these collateral but important issues of people's health, if you will.
I would say it this way. The regulatory agency that issues the permit should be making sure that the facility is operating in a way that does not jeopardize the health of the public. But if they fail to do that, which they have in some examples, public health has no choice but to intervene. But we're intervening without the clear regulatory authority. And when people ask us, because we get challenged by this, they ask us, by what authority are you coming in here? We say the broad authorities of the health officer. And we
That was what I
feel
was
that
trying to
sticks.
sort
Yeah,
of
we
get
feel
at.
that sticks.
The permit is issued by the Oil and Gas Authority or something?
Well, it is, but there's also a local permit that's issued as well. So I think.
By which agency?
Well, it depends. I mean, in some cases, it's the Coupa agencies, but depending on which jurisdiction, it could be various agencies.
Okay.
But the point is that I think this isn't a question of whether we've got adequate authority. I would really like us to be at a point where we're enforcing to the full extent of the law, and then we say, it's not getting us enough, so let's increase but But it's hard to go and argue for additional regulations when you're not even enforcing the regulations that are on the books. So we have a lot of work to do in this area, and there's plenty of blame to go around.
And I'm sure there's financial pressure on the other side from the producers and so on. who say-
Absolutely, because some of them are small operators, and
Right.
so it's a dilemma.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Commissioner Hawkes. Thank you so much, Mr. Bilomo, for your very detailed report and for speaking on behalf of the commission. I just have, I appreciate the concern. I just have a lot of questions because I feel like this is great getting information from the Department of Public Health. However, we haven't had an opportunity to hear from the industry as well, as far as, gas company, Edison, DWP. And I'm trying to figure out, I'm hearing the pattern of it became an issue, AQMD said it wasn't an issue. The park became an issue. They came out and investigated, park wasn't an issue, but then yet a council came to close it down. So I'm just trying to understand what the variables are to make sure either we are in compliance or we're not. And I know that gas company, Edison, DWP, every utility is heavily regulated. And I'm just trying to figure out where are we failing? Where are the issues that completely have gone off the radar where now you guys have to step in? Like, is it a rapid epidemic? Is this something that's continuously happening? I mean, you see the issues with like Exide that's going on for about 20 years as being one issue. However, you have the issue of Aliso Canyon as well, which is just recent. So I'm just trying to understand, and maybe that's my concern, is that I'm just trying to get, as a, being appointed as a commissioner, getting the whole picture, and I'm trying to figure out where are the violations, what hasn't been addressed, what has been erroneously neglected, what has been found that the entities responsible haven't addressed, is kind of where I'm trying to get
Great.
at.
Great question, and I'll be brief. The extent to which there are regulatory actions on these facilities, and I'm talking about the very basic, right? When you have a set of standards, there is a routine inspection that has to take place to see whether or not the facility is operating in accordance with the standards. The state regulators that are doing this work are not doing it frequent enough. And as I said earlier, I think they're more interested in, and as John had mentioned, they're more focused on what's going on below the surface of the ground than what's going on the surface. So what I will tell you, and it's just my opinion after working in this area for 40 years, there isn't enough regulation in this industry. There's a lot of self-regulation, but we can't rely on it. And if we just want to look at the Aliso Canyon example, and let me just tell you that when I first got started in the environmental field, some of my colleagues worked at the gas company, and they had a stellar reputation for environmental compliance. I think these things don't always stay the same. Sometimes they change. But if you think about the condition of the well and the fact that in testing other wells, they're finding that there are some problems. These were problems that could have been predicted, and that's what makes it sad, is that we could have predicted the potential for a blowout like this, and that's why that field is still not under pressure and producing, because we can't guarantee the same thing won't happen again. So I would just not mince words and tell you I don't think there's been proper regulation, and I don't think it's necessarily that the regulations aren't strong enough. They're just not being enforced.
Commissioner Sharp?
Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight, and I want to acknowledge this is your second attempt to address the commission, so thanks for your time and effort. I live a handful of blocks from Furman Street and was appointed by the council district in that community to represent those residents, and so I'm keenly aware of the protective role that your department's playing in this regard for myself and my neighbors, so thank you for that. My question is rooted in our jurisdiction, which is that we are a appointed body, the City of Los Angeles, and I'm hopeful you could illuminate to move us to a point of being able to contribute meaningfully to the city process, whether there are other municipalities under the County of Los Angeles umbrella that have adopted or, as you've pointed out, more effectively enforced and implemented statute or regulatory approaches that prioritize the public health and welfare. 88 cities in the county and unincorporated areas of the county, there must be a range of approaches to this, and if you could leave us with a handful of examples of other municipalities that we ought to be paying attention to for their regulatory approach, that would be of use.
Matt, it's a great opening, and I will probably have information for you on that later, but currently I don't. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that this is one of those activities that is closely regulated at the state level. And I believe that although there are certain things the fire department can do, if somebody wants to come in and really improve and enhance the protections for these facilities, I think they're going to run into some roadblocks with the state. But let me check to see whether some local jurisdictions may have already, increased the degree of regulation and have much more effective programs. I don't think this is the sad thing is, I don't think this is a major change. I really think it's keep the regulations the way they are and have agencies report out on to what degree the facilities are complying with the existing regulations. I will bet you'll find that there is a high rate of substantial non-compliance. But it would sure be nice to have that report. That's one of the things we're doing in the county is we are asking the regulatory agencies to tell us. We're looking not just at facility by facility, we're starting to look now at highly impacted, highly burdened communities. And what we want to do is give the state regulators a map and say, give us a report out on all of your regulated facilities within this boundary, because this is a highly burdened community, and we're going to do everything we can to improve the level of risk within that community.
I think our capacity to be an effective partner for your team in that process is magnified at the city level. where,
Totally
of course,
agree.
we were appointed from, so to the extent to which we could, receive updates, information regarding the applicable city departments and or city legislative vehicles that could be deployed to most effectively protect residents' health, that would be an area where we would be most useful.
Will do. And I think a lot of this lack of regulation sometimes by the state agency, I've had operators tell me, look, the DTSC, you name it, they're not doing a job and it's not even helping us. Okay, so that's the thing is that I think in some cases you could probably get the industry to not fight some of these things if the regulatory agency was doing it in a methodical, logical way as opposed to just trying to come up with a political answer to the heat that they're feeling. So I think we all want to see sensible answers, and we could probably get support for them because nobody wants to go through, nobody wants to go through what these communities and what the people responsible for the communities go through. It's just that when you have lax regulation for so long, people start to make a bet as to whether or not you're ever going to come in and tell them to start complying with the law. And we don't want industry, marginal industry, because not all industry thinks that way, but we don't want anybody thinking that those laws are going to be ignored.
Any other questions?
Actually, I have a follow-up question, Commissioner Hawkes. Is it a situation of lack of parties no longer complying with the regulations? Is that something that you can point to, that you can show concretely these utilities aren't following the regulations and these are their violations, and you've tried working with them and they're not complying? I'm just trying to see the linkage. Is there like a non conformity? Is there a non ability to work closely with the department to address the issues?
I think we'd have to, and again, I want you to know that the Public Health Department is stepping ahead on these because we see that public health is being impacted. And when we talk with the regulatory agencies, because again, we don't go in and do a routine inspection within these facilities. When we talk with the regulatory agencies, they're actually interested now in hearing from the health officer. So I think we're all waking up to this, and whether we have a regulation on the book to enforce, we still can inform the agencies that do have the regulations about the impact that the lack of compliance has on the public. So I think there's plenty of work here for all of us, and I would say that I believe there are some instances where the responsible parties are no longer in existence, and so the government, in the case of the Furman Street at least two of those wells, two of the three that were problematic last week, are really an award of the state, for lack of a better word, and the state is having to expend the money to assess and correct them. But it doesn't make the job any less urgent. And I think we have to show that public health urgency in order to give the state government agencies the ability to go to their administration and say, we've got some bad situations and we're going to need through the budget process to be able to deal with this on more than, a 30-year time horizon, because they've given a certain amount of money every year and they can't even scratch the surface with it. So I can't answer your question about where are the clear, concrete examples, but I know they're there, of non-compliance, because we're not going in and routinely assessing for compliance. That is the designated state regulatory agency that does that.
Commissioner,
Yeah, just a quick
Commissioner?
follow-up. Some of the environmental impact, I mean, if you're going to put up a building in Los Angeles, you have to tell them how many trucks are going to be coming and what time, and you're limited when the hours of work and all that. Do you know if those kinds of types of regulations exist with relation to oil and gas production?
Well,
And who would enforce them?
yeah, I think that if you're looking at a new project, we're probably going to be a whole lot better
Right.
today asking those questions. And when I first got back to the health department, one of my people used to be big on reviewing these types of developments, and he was really zeroing in on noise. And I asked about air, and he said, well, the air district, that's their subject matter. I go, no, it's got to be ours. So, but I don't think it's as methodical as it needs to be in this area.
Well, I share, for new wells, it'd be interesting on existing wells, presumably they periodically bring in more pipe to change it. And, in other words, they're kind of in progress all the time they're there for so in a sense, the environmental impact could
Is ongoing.
conceptually be applied ongoing rather than just at the initial.
Yeah, and I think that once we start looking at these facilities, I think it'll be evident to us how we can improve the level of risk or reduce the level of risk and make the conditions a little more conducive to people living.
I have one more question. There aren't any more. Okay. The safety valve on SS-25 had been removed, I think sometime in the 70s, but apparently many people were not aware of that. Is that something that we expect to see on these wells, or is that something, that is not a requirement? Obviously, it's good to have, to err on the side of caution, but is it a requirement, and how, how do safety valves get removed without, I guess, government agencies having knowledge of that?
Right. Well, my understanding of that well is that no, it was not required. It did have a safety valve, which many years ago had broken, and they decided we're not going to replace it because it's really not within, the well is not located within, I think it was 300 feet from the nearest residence. So they didn't replace it. Now, think about what that release did to the environment, that massive release. So they were really looking at the wrong thing. When that standard was put together, it was really trying to say, how do we make sure that if there's a problem at that well, we don't get explosive gases going into a home and then causing an explosion. So that's probably why they thought of that. But, somebody should have said, well, what happens if that well, without that relief valve, blows someday? And how long will it take us to get the equipment in here to abandon it? And I think they would have gone through this whole process and say, this could take us 4 months. And had they done that, this is this perpetual environmental impact assessment you were just talking about. Had they done that, somebody might have said, my God, we're really exposed here. Let's either station equipment nearby, or let's put in those valves so that we can push a button and have it sealed off closer to the reservoir. So we live and learn on these things, hopefully, right?
Is there an inventory through a state agency where it actually shows which wells have these safety valves and which ones do not?
I hope so. I think so. The state has a number of procedures and tests they have to do before they could re-energize that field, if they ever do. But because remember, what they did there, this wasn't just your typical oil reservoir. This was a depleted oil reservoir that was converted into storing natural gas at high pressure. And so everybody's concerned about what you just referenced, and my guess is, hopefully, I mean, that's why we're not going to go away from this one. We want to make sure that before there is ever any talk about repressurizing that field, that they've done the test that the state has already specified they need to. And hopefully that'll be enough, but we're going to have to ask that question.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate
Thank
you
you
coming
very
out.
much.
Okay, we will move on to public comment. Okay, I don't have any cards for public comments for this particular item, so we will move on to item 2, which is a discussion and action on requesting the city council. Oh no, I'm sorry. Reading the minutes. Discussion and action on resolution by Commissioners Shannon, Sharp, and Vic relative to expressing the support of the Los Angeles City Health Commission for a 1,500-foot buffer zone on oil and gas drilling in residential neighborhoods. So, Commissioners, in your packet is a copy of the resolution. And what I'll do is I'll read the therefore be it resolved for those who are listening or who will be listening on audio. Says, therefore be it resolved that in order to address health impacts, noise, pollution, and other consequences of drilling activity, the Los Angeles City Health Commission recommends that the City of Los Angeles establish and enforce a 1,500-foot buffer zone between oil and gas drilling and nearby homes, schools, places of worship, parks, and other public spaces, and therefore be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be sent to all members of the Los Angeles City Council, the President of the City Planning Commission, President of the Board of Fire Commissioners, the Chief Legislative Analyst, and the City Attorney. So we will have discussion among the commissioners, and then we will move to public comment, and then after public comment, we can move the agenda. So is there a motion? Okay.
We're gonna have discussion.
Okay, John.
Is this prospectively or for existing oil and gas extraction?
Yeah, so I did get an email from someone asking if we could do a substitute motion, which would be for 1,500 feet around oil wells, gas wells, and the fall line extending downhill from such wells. So in other words, that would, the intention was for it to be existing, but I think somebody had basically felt that it didn't necessarily cover that within the actual resolution.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me be difficult, and I mean, notwithstanding that we may want to do it, it would seem to me to be retroactively difficult, if not impossible, to establish a retroactive relocation of those wells. You know, I mean, we've heard last time we were here, of course, they're virtually outside people's homes, and I'm sympathetic, but I just don't know how you just tell the operator of that well, just pick it up and move it 1,500 feet. I don't think that's going to happen. So I guess that kind of discussion is going to come up, and I don't know if we want to address that within the context of this or not. And then just another point, we say residential neighborhoods, which is, I suppose we could that is a bit of a term of art in terms of whether residential means something specific, because then later on it talks about public spaces, places of worship, and so on. And I agree that that's not a good place for wells, but those aren't exactly residential neighborhoods. So just a little maybe wordsmithing here, I guess, is what I'm dealing with a little bit.
Okay, would you like to make a substitute
Well, I
motion
wish I
to make that more clear?
I think we're still in discussion, correct?
Yeah.
It's not a motion at this time.
Okay, do we want to entertain a motion or have discussion first?
Discussion first.
Okay.
So I had several, thank you, Commissioner Hawkes. I had actually a lot of concerns about this resolution. First of all, I understand the spirit of the request. However, I believe, like our former commissioner just mentioned, the fact if you're dealing with, like you mentioned, 70% of the city's active oil wells are within 1,500 feet of homes, schools, hospitals, and places of worship. So how does that work? How is that implemented? The other issue in the resolution also discusses that we've heard a variety of testimony. However, we still have not heard a variety of testimony from the entities that will be directly impacted. We've heard from communities, we've heard from county department. However, we haven't heard from any of the from LADWP, we haven't heard from Edison, we haven't heard from gas, or any of the other entities will be directly impacted by this. And just to be fair and balanced, I want to make sure as a commission, before we make a decision whether or not to proceed on something like this, that we have every entity represented so that we can ask those questions. In addition to, although I appreciated Mr. Bilomo's testimony, and I thought it was great, there were a lot of unanswered questions. There was a lot of, well, let me get back to you on that report. There were a lot of questions that were unanswered. So I personally, at this point, don't feel comfortable moving forward. And then I'm also questioning, where do we get the 1,500-foot setback issue from? Like, where is that number from? Is that the number proposed by LA County, AQMD? I just feel like there's so many questions on this issue. And to be honest with you, I only saw this resolution as of today, and I didn't have time to, adequately prepare and read and have a lot of these questions answered. So for me to move forward on approving a resolution that I just saw within a couple of hours without feeling like I had, every entity here so that we can discuss it, just makes me, gives me pause. And I'm not saying it's something that we should or shouldn't adopt. I'm just feeling like there's a lot of holes in this process that I would like to figure out how. One, I do like the idea that we're, as a commission, going to discuss the idea of taking a position on things. So I think there needs to be a protocol set up for that. But two, I just feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions regarding this resolution and trying to figure out how we got to all of these numbers.
Okay, well, I can answer at least a 1,500-foot setback. So the only regulatory precedence that I know of, or that's been brought to our attention, was from two cities. One is Dallas, Texas, and the other is Flower Mound, Texas, that both have a 1,500-foot setback. So there is regulatory precedence. It's the only regulatory precedence that I know of. So it's not something that we were just making up. It's actually something that's been vetted through two municipalities, and for one has had 4 lawsuits against it, all of which were dismissed by the courts. So that's the background that I know on that. In terms of hearing from, I suppose, LADWP and SoCalGas, I think the charges that we were given from the city council, which weren't charges really, it was a request, was to look at the health impacts of residents. And so we've been looking at that. I don't know how they specifically would be impacted other than from maybe a business standpoint, which may be something that you want to look at or not look at, but I don't find it to necessarily be, the charges of this particular commission, which is looking at health impacts specifically, and trying to do what's best for the residents of the city. So while I think if I were a council member, I might take a lot of things into consideration, I think for the purposes of this resolution, it was dealing specifically with health impacts and setbacks and looking at regulatory precedents. And what we have had 2 hearings on this already, or at least people coming to speak at 2 different hearings. So the 1,500-foot setback has come up at least from 3 different speakers that we've had come here and speak to us. I don't remember anyone raising an issue about it then, but I do know that I did ask where the 1,500 feet came from, and it was from Dallas. And since then, I've done a lot of research to make sure that that is true in 2 municipalities now in Texas, which is a fairly rich oil-producing state, have enacted a 1,500-foot setback.
Follow-up question. How did the city of Dallas, or these two Dallas entities you're referring to, how did they address the issue of existing wells?
I don't think those particular ordinances actually were applicable to existing wells.
But this resolution is referring to existing wells, is that correct?
Right. This resolution is referring to a 1,500-foot setback. The intention was, due to the health impacts that we've heard, basically from community members in 2 different hearings, from Mr. Bilomo today, is that, what is in the best interest of residents? What are the health impacts? Is it fair for them to be living in these conditions? And what can we do to alleviate that? I know that people are also concerned about the business angle of this, which, when you hear that 8,000 families were evacuated, when you hear that people weren't able to get to their jobs, when you hear that parks have been closed, when you hear that faculty members at schools were detrimentally impacted, that's also a business impact. And so, and health-related issues are also an impact to a family, to their ability to make money, to go to work. And so, it's on both ends.
Commissioner Hawkins, I'm sorry, and please don't and interpret my line of question as looking at more as a business impact. I'm just looking at more holistically as far as addressing the issues. And that's my concern. Like I said, somebody who's worked on environmental justice issues for a while, I understand and I get it, but to me, it always comes down to making sure you have every person who's impacted, and also the folks who are at the hands of whatever the issue is. You need to have everybody and every stakeholder at the table before you can move forward. I mean, that's just what I was getting at. It's not about a business angle. It's not about being a profit or anything like that. It's just the issue of in making public policy or recommendations, public policy wide, it's important to have every entity at the table. That's all. That was all basically what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
I would also like to say that maybe, rather than a resolution, it would be a recommendation, and that it would be a date, that we'd have to have some kind of date on this. So, and since we're going to be charged with a report, I mean, that's a big function of what we're to do, that this might be one of a recommendation rather than a separate resolution. That might also be another path forward.
Commissioner Vick?
I just want to actually agree with Commissioner Jaquez. I just facilitated an event in my day job, which I'm not representing right now at this time. Just make that clear, but where there were some folks that came and talked about environmental health issues, and there was someone that was representing sort of the other side. And I think it was important that that person was in the room, because the folks that were advocating for some protections for the community and the residents were able to, I think, give him some things to think about, because he had made a couple of comments that were quickly and swiftly sort of dealt with by the advocates in the room. So I think it is important for that voice to be heard, even if it's just for them to come here and hear what the residents and the community members are dealing with, and the advocates that are working really hard. So the spirit of this resolution is fabulous. I think it's in line with what a lot of the folks that are working on this are about. But I do think that perhaps having that other side come in and at least hear, maybe not that they haven't heard it before, but I guess to be balanced would be appropriate.
Okay, Commissioner Hesserich?
Yeah, I'm becoming more persuaded that we need to hear a bit more. I'm also still concerned about, since it is 70% of them are within that, we could probably have some small producers come in here and say that if this is put into place, they'd be out of business and so on. And maybe we'd like them to be out of business, but I think we ought to hear them say it. And I know that one other commissioner who's not present commented to me after the previous meeting that nobody had clearly established a specific health impact. There are certainly quality of life impacts, but the clear link for, and now I'm sure there are some folks that are affected by it, but still to make the assertion at this point in a resolution that it's only the health impacts may be a little premature, so.
Commissioner Sharp?
I appreciate the lively exchange of views. It's helpful. I look forward to hearing from some of the stakeholders that have taken the time to join us tonight, and would love to reserve a moment to regroup our discussion after we've heard some input from those that have gathered around here, as there's unique expertise in the audience that I don't want to suggest is mine. I'm a resident within one of these 1,500-foot zones around the Furman Street well, so I'm sort of keenly aware of this from a number of vantage points, but I certainly use the lens, and I think it's helpful that we're lifting this up to try and forge a sort of a common approach through which we're seeing the problems and therefore, any potential solutions. I certainly see the scope of my responsibility here to be narrowly determining whether the evidence presented to us and any, personal or professional judgment I've accumulated prior to joining the commission enables me to make a health protection recommendation, I guess, is certainly the lens through which I look at it. I am optimistic that the council members and the mayor and the city departments are better positioned than we are to assimilate a variety of other important considerations in the formulation of the public policies that are to be promulgated. But I certainly attempt to only in this context assess the health impacts. And at least to me, it has been persuasive in the remarks to date that the extraction activities, and particularly the residential dwelling where someone may be, there 18, 24 hours a day, even as a senior, are absorbing an adverse health consequence. I believe there have been important legitimate concerns raised about exactly what the causality is, whether it's the hydrocarbons or other industrial activity on the site. But to me, there's no question that there are simply incompatible uses in how the city has been zoned. And it's our responsibility, at least I feel it's my responsibility here to, when given said opportunity, to illuminate that it's important for policymakers to consider these health impacts in their ultimate formulation of policy. And in this particular case, it just seems that the industrial hydrocarbon use is incompatible with the residential areas, as is occurring right where I live now. And I'm hopeful that we can be supportive of, in the right form, potentially this or some version of it, the efforts to align the uses of industrial activity with residential in particular, as the council formulates policy on this.
I just want to say very quickly that I think I see this from the point of view of prevention and an early intervention approach, because we know what's happening, and looking towards the future. I think the motion in some sense serves to me as something that could be utilized with prevention and early intervention, but I do agree too that other aspects need to be brought into play, but we would have to rely on a lot of assistance from the county and other agents to get most of the questions answered. But I do see it as a good predictor on a going forward basis. Some of the contents of the motion.
Okay. Timeline-wise, we have 2 more meetings for this makeup of this commission. So I'm not, we have a lot of speakers coming in September because there were a number of issues that came up that the commissioners wanted to address, and a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of the speakers that we wanted to come were not available either last month or this month. So we do have a lot of people coming in September, so I don't know that we could, I'm pretty sure that we can't agendize that unless people want to stay for a very long time in September for the meeting. So I think that's something to take into consideration for everyone. And we do need to issue the report So if we're not on record for specific policy issues for the report, it becomes a little problematic. So I'm just putting that out there. Any other questions or comments from
Yeah,
commissioners?
Sorry, I just wanted us to address that issue. I understand the time sensitivities. However, we were all entrusted by our council members to make sure that we serve on this commission and that we serve as commission at the utmost, representing them and their constituents, and making sure that if we do make a decision policy-wide or moving forward, that we should have all the facts is what I'm getting at. So I don't mind if it goes into several hours. That's fine with me, because I don't want to move forward and just feel like it's a time constraint. I made a commitment to this commission, and I believe all my other fellow commissioners did as well. So just wanted to put that out there as well, that if we need to put that, and maybe the meeting is a little bit longer and we have all entities represented, then I'm totally okay with that. So thank you.
Okay. I don't have any comment cards for this particular item. Is anyone holding comment cards?
Please come forward. Are there any members of the public that would like to address item 3? Item 2? I see several folks here.
Okay. So we should move to a motion. And the way that I see this sort of unfolding is we can either make a motion to pass the resolution, make a motion to amend it, or make a motion to postpone to a date certain.
Michelle, are you going to address this or not? Clock is ticking.
I guess I would just first of all say, and I'll turn in my card in 1 second, how much we appreciate the amount of time that the commission has put into studying this issue and hearing from the community. We were also, I'm Michelle Pritchard, by the way, with the Liberty Hill Foundation, and our foundation has been greatly concerned with this issue, as we have heard from communities throughout the city about the health and safety impacts and neighborhood quality of life. So we also just found out about the resolution and your hope to pass something substantive on this issue just on Friday. So we really haven't had a chance to thoroughly look at the resolution. I know that we thought it could be strengthened around the notion of clarifying the new and expanding and current oil wells. It's a long discussion, but we really want to salute your effort to hear our plea for a buffer zone to separate these industrial uses from sensitive land uses. So with that said, whether it's tonight that you pass the resolution or if it is in at the next meeting, I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole coalition, but I think our overarching goal is we would love to see the Health Commission pass a resolution like this. So that's kind of, I think, where we are, and I invite other members to speak. We're trying to figure this out. I did want to respond quickly on just a couple of things that came up. First of all, with regard to Commissioner Jaquez's question on the 1,500-foot buffer, I was the coordinator of this publication, the Drilling Down report that Liberty Hill put out about a year ago. And in addition to the 2 Texas examples, I just wanted to say that I found here, I remembered the South Coast Air Quality Management District also has established a 1,500-foot radius for purposes of air monitoring and responding to odor complaints from oil drilling operations with a heightened level of response time and corrective action. So that's in the AQMD protocol from 2013, number one. Number two, Dr. Jim Sad, who was here, I think, for your May meeting and only had 1 minute to testify, has submitted a letter, and I will distribute it. I brought hard copies of it, but he will also be, and we have Dr. Shamasunder from Occidental College here tonight too, will be completing some research in the next 30 days with regard to the 1,500-foot buffer proposal. So that's coming. So thank you for the time. Sorry I went over.
Great, thank you.
Just make comment on that particular point. I appreciate the comment about the 1,500 feet. That did say for air monitoring. That doesn't say that you preclude the operation from being within. That's just a kind of clarification that I think we need to to do to make this a little stronger. So
Okay.
Actually, I just wanted to, Commissioner Hawkins, again, I just wanted to point, I'd love to hear more about the letter but I'm talking about, like, that's what I mean. There's follow-up questions that would be good to have ahead of time so we can dissect it a little bit. We'll go do a deeper dive into. Thank you.
Can you tell us again what our options are?
Okay, the way that I see it unfolding, and obviously anyone can make a motion outside of these, but I think one would be to move to pass the resolution as written, move to amend the resolution, move to postpone bringing the resolution forward to a date certain. Although at the October meeting, which the date will be changed because it falls on a holiday, we will be looking at our annual report and most likely the report recommendations on oil and gas that the council has requested. So in some cases, we may just be looking at this particular policy issue in the context of the report that comes out, which I would rather have us vet this issue and this policy statement prior to the report, because at that point it's unclear what we would do if the report were rejected by the commission.
I move to postpone the resolution until October.
I'll second that.
Can I amend that as well, or no?
Well, it's been moved and seconded.
Okay.
So it would have to,
Yeah,
unless
okay.
you wanted to put through a substitute motion, and then the substitute motion, if that passes, becomes the main motion.
Got it. Okay. Substitute motion. I would like to postpone to a later time, but ensuring all entities are invited to attend to testify at that point.
I second.
Yeah, I second or accepts that too.
Okay, so we'll have to vote on the substitute motion. So all in favor, is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor of the substitute motion, please say
Yes,
aye.
my discussion
Oh,
would be just for purposes of the record to make sure that the instruction is clear that it could be briefly enumerated what some of the other additional entities are that would be valuable contributors, so that can be at least considered.
Yes. Agreed.
No, I'm asking right now, just for discussion purposes, when we say other entities,
Who are
is
we
it the
referring
list you
to?
identified earlier?
Yes, definitely the utilities directly impacted.
Okay.
As well as, and also open it up to Liberty Hill to go ahead and further the discussion, any other entities. So we have community, we have entities directly impacted, and any other interested entities.
So everyone's clear when we say additional entities, that's all I was trying to.
Okay, so that would, okay, so all in is there any discussion on this? Okay, all in favor of the substitute motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that was a vote on the substitute motion. Now the substitute motion becomes a main motion, so unfortunately we have to vote on it again as our main motion. So the main motion being that we will take this resolution up again at a time when all stakeholders can be present, including the utilities, Liberty Hill, other community partners. So
Oil
all in
producers.
favor, is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor,
Actually,
please.
I have a discussion, but I'm sorry. Are we going to specifically say the October meeting, or is it?
I don't think that's a good idea, because I think our October meeting will be vetting our annual report. So if we can make it happen in September, as long as people are willing to stay late and we don't lose our quorum. Our biggest, the biggest worry for me is that we would lose our quorum. So as long as we are resolving to do this, we can attempt to make it happen in September.
Is there a subcommittee formulated as a subdivision of this body?
There is a subcommittee,
To
yes.
look at this that could potentially provide some written information to commissioners in advance that would potentially synthesize in the form of there just seem to be some questions asked today that maybe a small group could convene and provide some information that would reduce the risk that I think is legitimate that you're raising, that this just goes on too long, that we wouldn't have enough people to vote on it. I think that's an important risk, and I'm wondering if there's something we could do between now and what I believe is September 12th. Ms. Rosales is our next.
September 12th.
There's something that could occur between now and then to prepare so that the discussion could be more efficiently completed. And I'm not sure if that subcommittee as the venue, or if there's some other constellation of triad or team that could try and at least enumerate a couple of these kind of from a Q&A standpoint that could help mitigate what's a legitimate concern that you've brought up.
Right, and so my understanding from the motion is that we're inviting people to come and testify as part of our speaker presentations, giving them a certain allotment of time and then questions. So invariably, that will take a bit, even if the subcommittee prepares a report in advance.
Right, so the report would just be an augmentation of, right.
There doesn't need to be a report. I'm just trying to
Right.
find a way to efficiently bring together enough content
Right.
that, we can at least formulate a view, even if there's a number of kind of 2-minute remarks.
Okay. And there could also be a situation where we do invite people from the various entities, I'm guessing the LADWP and SoCal Gas, and they're not able to make the meeting, in which case, what do we do? Do we just hear from some people in September and then maybe have a special meeting in order to hear from the rest of the entities, or?
Would certainly be most useful for me, I can't speak for others, is to receive this sort of correspondence where someone puts their views together in kind of a 2-page.
Yeah, either.
To the
in-
extent that if someone can't come, if they can provide a reaction, a
Right.
response to this draft resolution,
Okay.
folks can read that with enough advance time,
Right.
acknowledging Commissioner Jaquez's request for a little more lead time. Written comment is just as useful to me.
Okay, so that would be in the spirit of your motion. Is that correct, Commissioner
Yes, as long
Hawkes?
as we receive the information at least 48 hours at the least.
Okay, so it doesn't have to actually be a presentation
No,
here.
in addition to. So if they can be here, that'd be great for the presentation. If they want to submit the report ahead of their presentation to make their points more concise, and that's fine. As I think, one, the invitation needs to be extended, and two, if they have information they want to forward the commission prior to, I think that's a possibility of making sure that the commission receives it at least 48 hours for review.
Okay, but my question was, what if they cannot come to present to the commission?
I think we just need to select the date, and that's just gonna be the date to move forward to
Yeah.
the decision.
I
Okay,
would
so if they
concur.
can't make it, then at least the invitation has been extended.
Right,
We have asked that they present
yes.
Yeah.
a 2-page, at least a 2-page,
Right.
report back.
That's why we need to
in the form of a letter.
select the
And
dates.
and then that would meet the spirit of I just
Right.
want to make sure that I understand the parameters.
Yes.
Okay.
If I may, could I just make sure that you mentioned DWP and and gas company, and what, the opportunity for spokespersons for the oil and gas industry directly. They may not show up, they may blow it off, but at least to show that the intent was there to invite them. And similarly, there were mentioned a couple of other agencies involved, such as the state oil and gas folks. Now, again, they may not want to show up, but it would be useful to hear from them as to what their view is about what they do or don't do in enforcement.
In addition to, I would like to recommend AQMD as well, that was also brought up today.
And those in attendance that chose not to address the microphone, you're welcome to provide written comments in advance of the hearing to further inform us of your views.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table. Do I need to repeat that, or are we fairly, okay? I think I've repeated it twice now. All right, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, great. So,
Sorry, point of clarification, so it'll be at the September 12th
so
meeting.
I'm going to attempt to make it in September, as long as people are willing to stay, because I think October is cutting it too close.
Okay, and then point of clarification, Candy, how did the invitations, will you be sending those out to the other stakeholders?
It's
I think
Commission
it's
President.
either me or one of the other commissioners that send out the invitations. It usually depends on who has connections. In this case, it'll probably be me.
Can you also send the commissioners a copy of the invitation as well? Great, thank you.
It becomes public record then, just so that you
Great.
know.
And if we could clarify the date for the October meeting?
Yeah, so Candy, do you want to speak to the survey that you've been doing to change the date for the October meeting? Oh, actually, we
Commissioner
can't do it
Underhill, I
on
don't
this. I'm
think we
sorry,
can do it on this item.
we'll move the agenda and we'll talk about that at the end where we take up future meetings. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've had public comment on item 2. Item 3 is items for future discussion. Now we can talk about the next meeting. Candy, can you, under items for future discussion, can we talk about the meeting date for October?
The dates that were selected were October 17th or October 24th, to see who's available. But there's been 5 commissioners that have not responded. 7 of the other commissioners said they're available on October 17th. 1 member isn't available. And for October 24th, there's also 7 members that are available, but there's 1 that is not available.
Okay, so in both cases, we're 1 away from quorum. So
Yes.
maybe we can send out another email to the commissioners who haven't responded, and then we'll see where we get quorum.
Okay.
Or the majority, the highest number of people who can make it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so for items of future discussion, we have a number of issues that we've wanted to take up, and we're just trying to find a date where the actual speakers can come on the date that we actually have our meetings. One is to have the lead person from the CLA on homelessness to come and address the commission. We wanted somebody to speak on health access issues post-ACA. There was someone that we've been trying to get for the past few months on the dearth of doctors and specialists in the city of Los Angeles. So I think those are at least 3 speakers that we would likely need to look at for September. But we also have work groups who will start meeting, and there will be, I think, holes in information that need to be filled. And so we will likely have other requests for speakers coming for September. It doesn't have to be today, obviously. But if your work group meets and you find that there are specific issues that you need clarification on and would like speakers, if you could let us know as soon as possible.
And also, too, just the status of the report.
Yeah.
That should be an item. And even the, from the minutes last time, we had the motion to request City Council delete the word all. And I wanted to
Yes,
find out
that's
what
in the
that
works.
status.
That's in the works. So I don't know when that will come up at council. I haven't heard back.
We also discussed the idea of revisiting the subject topics that we originally came with and we're supposed to discuss at this meeting and agree as a commission which items we're going to go ahead and highlight in the report, since there was like a number, and wanted to make sure and verify that the commission is okay with the proposed subjects, or if they wanted to reduce or increase.
Okay. So some of that can actually be done in the working groups. So the working groups themselves can decide which issues they would like to bring forward for the report or not. So I think at that level, when people are discussing what goes into the report or what goes into the draft, it's probably easier in a smaller group of people who are specifically speaking on that issue or have specific expertise on that issue. But that's just sort of, I think, how we had originally envisioned it back in November or December when we had established work groups.
Right. The last meeting we had, we discussed that we would, as a commission, we would revisit now that we're looking at the report. I mean, that was my understanding, unless, like I said, I guess that was
You
my
can look at the
understanding.
minutes, I suppose. I don't
There's no detail in the minutes.
Yeah.
We had Dr. Boyce, I
That was-
believe,
it was
or
actually-
Boynes.
It was my motion, or my request, so that's why it's vivid.
Just to clarify, so I'm tracking, you're referring to when Dr. Boynes presented from Cal State Northridge, he asked us for some direction and guidance.
We talked about, from that report, we mentioned that there were originally 8 subject items selected, correct? And so at that point, we said, do we want, as a commission, revisit, are these the 8 focuses we want to focus on, or do we want to reduce from that or add? And that was what was, what I proposed. and I believe was approved at the last meeting.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I'm sorry.
In terms of the
It's not in the minutes.
The 8 items the
The-
same as the 8 working groups? Just so I.
Yes, the
Right,
8
so,
items.
so there are 8
Yes.
working groups, and my basic feeling is that if people don't want to populate those working groups, or if the working groups don't want to bring anything forward for the report, then that likely would take care of that specific issue, as opposed to agendizing it on a, I honestly don't remember that coming up, but instead of agendizing it on a commission agenda, it seems that the individual work groups could just decide either not to bring issues forward within that specific work group, or not.
Just like, it was just kind of my focus, just to make sure that, because, I mean, if we're going to address one of the issues, going to be homelessness, there's going to be a substantial portion of that, and understanding we have a few months, and those working groups have to work with the university. So I just wanted to the spirit of my discussion was to ensure that we have a report that is reflective of the major issues impacting and substantive versus just a lot of quantitative versus qualitative was my concern, which is why I raised it.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussions about future agenda items?
Can I just bring up a related issue? Reasons, the community's involved in.
I prefer this location, yes.
Yeah.
Are you planning on approaching health services for someone to come to talk about health post the Affordable Care Act?
That was the one that I mentioned.
Yeah, okay,
So for the
you wanna
next
a-
meeting, we're
you
looking
wanna
for
ask-
someone.
You want to ask Dr. Katz? You want to ask Dr. Katz to come back, or Mark Galley?
Sure, and
from the-
if you want to send me an email on
Yeah.
suggested speakers, that would be great.
Okay, okay.
I'd love to hear
I-
from Dr. Katz anytime.
I can ask, or I can send you the.
Okay, or later on. Okay, any other future agenda items that anyone is interested in bringing forward? Okay, item 4 then is public comment. And we have Adam Cohen from AIDS Healthcare Foundation.
I'm quick. Good evening. My name is Adam Cohen. I have a new title, the Director of Advocacy and Policy Research at AIDS Healthcare Foundation. As of August 8th, I believe today, there have been 27 cases of meningitis in Southern California, half of which are in Los Angeles County, and half of those occurred, based on Los Angeles County data, occurred among men who have sex with men. And so for organizations that provide healthcare services for LGBT community members, this is very disconcerting and has raised many alarms. And I asked that the Health Commission issue a statement, ask the LA County Department of Public Health to vaccinate, make recommendations to LA City Council. This is a great opportunity for the LA City Health Commission to take a position. Outbreaks like the meningitis outbreak currently and still occurring is the exact reason why this Health Commission was formed. Thank you.
Great. That actually was another agenda item that I had for September, along with Zika virus, and to get an idea of where we are with both of those things, the county. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll have at least 6 presentations or items, and the 6th one being multiple presentations on oil and gas. Okay. Motion to adjourn, please. Okay, moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,